enough to push for greater FOI, because what you have is the official Secrets Act.
Okay, so just on this, in civil rasa, the Supreme Court, the Federal Court recognized the right as being housed, but it wasn't an FOI issue. So some people are saying it's obiter, I mean outside the scope of the decision, therefore not binding. But in the MTUC case, when we're dealing with the Shabas concession agreement, we're trying to get it disclosed to us, to our clients. We argued it, so the court recognizes the argument but doesn't reject it. So Hassan last judgment says FOI, then all this, and there's this amazing Canadian decision on how to give that. So I think there's enough there for us to argue, and we'll be testing that in the High Court on one of these election delineation cases that's coming up very soon.
Okay, great. Thank you. You came up with quite a lot in the few minutes, and you had a blank page earlier. Okay, so to avoid the conversation tonight being just between lawyers, I'm going to now invite Cynthia to give a civil society response. C4, of course, was founded to unveil explosive corruption issues and tackle them in the country. Could you give some examples of what we've talked about so far and how they could actually be applied to real-life cases? I mean, things that we read about in the newspapers. How does this apply to our own lives?
Thank you very much, Tricia. It's actually very exciting this evening because we've been talking for maybe the last 9 months or 6 months, yeah. And finally, we're coming to meet the most important stakeholders, actually, which is the Malaysian citizens, the public, and the people that hold the most important power in determining how our public institutions should work. But sometimes we all feel very powerless. And it's been very enlightening, actually, hearing from our three hotshot lawyers. So a bit of an honor sitting up here with them. But the point really is that the hotshot people are sitting here. The people that makes the decisions that the government needs to hear. Now, I'm saying this because among ourselves, the last 1 year has been very difficult for all of us. I mean, it's been a downslide when it comes to human rights. Public spending has been going haywire. We've heard so many controversies and scandals and so on. But we've kept the focus. We've kept the focus. A couple of us have actually sat down, worked through these documents and so on, and we're ready actually to talk to you about some real reforms. We've also met members of parliament from the Pakatan Rakyat side and had very good discussions on how to further refine the reforms, reform proposals and so on.
We do plan to do one with the BN, by the way, just in case anyone's wondering. Well, we will try.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that came out from there was that for members of the public, we do know that MACC does have wide-ranging powers. We also know that there are some limitations, and we heard a lot about how it can be improved. But we want to see action. We want to see MACC go after the big fish, big and small fish, the big guns, the ones that are seemingly in positions of power who decide how the country is run. But we also know that there are some very real blocks, some very real limitations. And in the past 1 week, we've seen, for example, the 1MDB that was mentioned just now. Can the MACC courageously take on investigations on the 1MDB? Will they be willing to do that? Because it does involve the Prime Minister, it involves the Finance Ministry, it involves people in very high positions of power. Now, we hear a lot of coffee shop talk that, cannot lah, MACC, forget it lah, our judiciary also no way lah, look at all the recent cases and so on and so forth. So we keep talking about how hopeless the whole situation is, but in essence, we actually hold the key to ensuring that public institutions will work for us. Now, I just want to give you an example. We had a public forum on the Auditor General's report a couple of months ago, when the Auditor General himself actually came to meet with the people. He made a rare public appearance to talk to the people about the findings of his report, what can be done, what cannot be done, and he expressed actually a lot of difficulties in his own office in terms of taking up big audits like the 1MDB, KLIA2, and so on. And he said, he didn't mince his words, he actually said he needed permission from the Finance Ministry to move in to audit. And so if he himself doesn't actually have that confidence and that ability to say, okay, I'm going to come in there and audit, it makes it actually very difficult for public institutions in our country to actually carry out their tasks to the fullest possible way, or to maximize the way in which they can carry out their work. So therein lies our task, and I think just to answer Tricia's question, it's really about our voices. We do need to pull our voices together. It's that building that collective fight against corruption. A very good example is India. They crowdsource a lot. There's a lot of collective efforts in actually getting voices together to build insightful comments, ways in which we can actually build a collective fight against corruption together. There is a very interesting website called IPaidABribe.com, and from there you can actually get people to lodge reports against corruption and so on. So collectively you can actually pressure public institutions to carry out their work. So one example about 1MDB is that if it weren't for the whistleblowers who were courageous enough to expose certain documents that they had in their hands, and for local NGOs like us to issue statements and so on, you wouldn't have had the cabinet today issuing important statements instructing the Auditor General to finally carry out an audit on the 1MDB, and also for the Public Accounts Committee to further investigate. So if everybody kept quiet, nothing would actually move forward. So this is a very important lesson for us, that public advocacy does bring us somewhere.
Okay, one more question for Cynthia. So how would the proposals that we are making today on the constitutional amendment and the amendment to the MACC Act, maybe just those two examples, how would they impact upon existing cases? Could they actually make the MACC more robust? If by making it more independent, how would that mean they can address certain things that they're not addressing today?
Well, the key issue that brought us together was the fact that many of us realized that there are limits to MACC's independence. So now we want to make MACC more independent through legislative reforms, but we also need to make MACC more independent by walking the talk. And I think by walking the talk is what's really important. They cannot hide behind the legalities of what hinders their work in moving forward. So therein lies our role. We are the eyes and ears of the way in which our government actually administers public funds. We are the ones that actually should be monitoring how public funds are properly managed, financial management is addressed in the country, and so on. So for MACC to become more robust, yes, we do need legislative reforms. It's really very important. But for MACC to be really courageous in actually taking the bull by its horns, taking on the topmost people and going right to the top, they actually need the support of the public as well. They need the support of the people. And we must, in no uncertain terms, call a spade a spade. If they're not doing their job, despite the legislative reforms, then we name and shame them. There is no other way. We have to actually be the ones to constantly monitor what they're doing. So I think that really is the only way, because having the law with you is very important too, but they could still not carry out the tasks as we expect. So they must meet our expectations. We have a very good Chief Commissioner and a good team of people in MACC. They've been very open to listen to us. But this challenge of being open and transparent goes far more than being open at a level in which they can dialogue with us and so on. If they don't open their doors to us, in terms of, let's say, Auditor General finds a whole range of wastage again in the coming Parliament when he reports on his findings, what actually happens then? If MACC doesn't actually tell us which are the cases that go up to them for corruption investigations, if they don't open the door to us to inform us of status of investigations that have been completed and are waiting the prosecution, if the Public Accounts Committee doesn't open their hearings to us, we will forever be desensitized to fighting corruption because we are left out of the bigger picture. So we're actually asking to be in, to let us in, because we can be effective monitors and we can be effective agents of check and balance. So that probably is the key to where we want to make our demands today, because for genuine transparency, this actually needs to happen. They need to actually include us in a whole lot of internal mechanisms, ongoing investigations and so on.
Okay, so thanks to all of the panelists. Tonight we're talking about the reforms that are needed to make the MACC more robust, more independent, and that will have an impact on our day-to-day lives. So I'm going to open up the floor right now to questions. We have about half an hour or more, depending on how long you want to stay here. Please state your name, where you're from, and please try to make your question as succinct as possible, and tell me who you're trying to address it to. We'll collect a couple of questions and then we'll come back to the panel. We have a gentleman in the middle here. Are there mics to go around?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, there are 2 mics going around. So first the gentleman over here, and then over on my right, and then over here. And Abhidevo, sorry. Didn't see you present.
My name is Joseph Paul. I'm just Joe Public. I know the public. Mine is not a question so much as a comment, observation. From what I hear, that this whole exercise is trying to make the MACC or the Corruption Commission more independent, and therefore the proposal is to create this independent commission. And then Saudara Malik then goes on to say that maybe it's not just a service commission; it should be elevated to one higher, something like the Election Commission. Now, looking at the list of commissions that already exist, I mean, look at the Armed Forces Council, the Police Force Commission, it doesn't give me much confidence that it can be independent. And then the example that Saudara Malik gives of the Election Commission, neither does that give me much confidence that this whole thing is going to be an independent exercise. So sometimes I almost get a sense of futility in this whole exercise. Perhaps the only possible glimmer of hope would be in the way in which the commissioners are appointed or selected. Maybe if there is much more public consultation, there might be a possibility that the commission will be independent. Added on to what Saudari Cynthia was talking about in terms of people actually actively participating in the workings.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that's why it's really important that our proposal actually talks about having 40% civil society representation. This may not be the case if you look at the proposals from the MACC itself. Okay, so we have someone over there, yes?
Hi, I'm Robert Fu from SAPM. Essentially, I think I agree with what Cynthia was mentioning about. I think in the end, you got to get the public involved, because I mean, if there's so much over dependence on trusted people, so to speak, all that, and we have actually seen so much that all these trusted people, in the end, question to be trusted, So I did ask one question when the Malaysian Competition Commission was launched, and actually went to the floor to ask a question. I asked this basic question: that how do we know the Competition Commission actually exercises its duties fairly. I mean, you can have a competition commission, but you start prosecuting all the businesses that are related to the opposition parties and all that, which is, in a sense, what we are seeing at the moment. So I said, why don't you, in the competition commission, make sure that whatever action that you take, okay, or investigation that you do, where you prosecute or you don't prosecute, you put all the reasons on the internet of your website. Then the public can read it. It's just like a federal court decisions where you have all the judgments and all that. Then you can actually question whether these guys are doing their job or they're just keeping quiet about this thing. And whenever there is a complaint, you know, whether in the competition commission or even this anti-corruption commission, let's say someone does a report on 1MDB, there must be an investigation done. Then you can say, okay, we have done the investigation, you know, we are dismissing this issue, there's no issue because of this. Then at least the public can come into play. That's one. So I think that should also be done for, if you ever start this so-called ACSC, you know, that they should publish all their investigations or dismissals or whatever online. The second thing is that, I mean, if you look at, you read about in online news and things like that, the people who are bringing up all the issues of corruption or perceived corruption, very rarely you have it from the government. You have basically everyone from the opposition. So my point here is that when you try to appoint the head of the ACAC, okay, you should actually get the opposition leader to be also made into the decision process. At least you have the governing leader and the opposition leader in the process. I think that would be probably a fairer means of deciding who's the head. And the last thing that I think you asked, I think if I didn't hear it wrongly, it was mentioned that the head of the ACAC, in the end you still go back to the PM for decision. Okay, although you say, oh, if he disagrees, he must give reasons and all that. I think that's not going to work. Because I mean, if you look at a case like 1MDB, you know, it's so loud in the public, but nobody's saying anything from the government. I mean, they can silence you forever and nothing moves. And in the end, it basically prevents you from actually pursuing your goals in terms of anti-corruption. So I think you shouldn't actually, I agree with what Imtiaz says. If you want to go and be independent, go all the way. You know, don't just pussyfoot around with all the public services commission and all that. It's not going to work. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you. We have a gentleman here with a pink shirt. Yeah.
Hi, Sean Tan, in the Mail Online. Would you see the ACSC as becoming like a replacement for the MACC, sort of a more independent body that slowly eases the MACC out and puts them up to pasture eventually?
Okay, I think that's the question we've been discussing here actually, but maybe one more question over here. Tunku Abidin, could someone pass the mic here please? Okay, there's lots of hands, so how does the panel want to do this? You want to collect all the questions first, or you want to answer after, say, another one or two more? Okay, we'll do...
Alright, okay, thanks Tricia, and good evening everyone. I'm veering towards what Dr. Malik has been saying about how not only this is it's a huge opportunity to have one reforming bill that fixes so many or strengthens so many of our mechanisms. On the and carving out a commission separate from the other service commission seems like a very logical idea in order to immunize it, I think, from the accusation that, oh, you're just another service commission, we don't have to give you due respect. So I think that I very much agree with Dr. Malik on that. On the on the case of whistleblowing and enforcement agencies, maybe it's an opportunity to revisit the idea of the IPCC. I don't know if you looked into that, the Independent Police Complaints Commission. And I wonder if you considered the possibility that whistleblowers might themselves be crooks. Yeah, thank you, someone said that. So, I mean, in a highly politicized environment, is it not possible that there will be hired provocateurs who claim to be whistleblowers and are now submitting false, invented information to the to the agency. So we have something you want to look into. Perhaps give, this is a cosmetic thing, but I think sometimes cosmetic things are important. Give the chair of the ACSC a good position in the order of precedence, something akin to federal court judges. Currently, the chairs of service commissions are 35th in the order of precedence, just above high court judges. Maybe you want to look at that. And maybe on the issue of the appointments, maybe look into, it was suggested by you that, the appointment is done, including the leader of the opposition, but perhaps there's an opportunity to create a parliamentary committee which is charged to look into the appointment as well. Thank you.
Okay, let's go for 2 more questions for this round. We have a gentleman there and then a gentleman there. Sorry. Yeah, actually, we would like to have some questions because most of you are giving comments, which is fine. This is a public consultation. But yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm afraid I missed the earliest part, so I might be a little bit taking something which is already stated before. As I summarize from the deliberations, I think the key issue is segregation of powers between the Attorney General and the Public Prosecutor, and the question of security of tenure. Now, if the Attorney General is made as the #1 legal advisor to the government, and the Public Prosecutor is segregated completely under a separate commission, that should solve a lot of the problems, including what we see as a problem for MACC. Would this be one of the possible considerations in this issue? Now, other concerns that I have, which probably are reflected by others as well, is there sufficient confidence in the Whistleblowers Act for the genuine whistleblowers to come forward and say so? Personally, I do not think so, because I think there's a crisis of confidence in governance overall. Whether it's a political barisan or pakatan is not an issue. People will not be willing to come out unless they're willing to sacrifice themselves. Now, key issue, I think, is, as was mentioned, I mentioned, I think, Attorney General, not Auditor General. Now, as far as the Auditor General's reports are concerned, the question of accountability is there, but has anything been done on this? There are a lot of people who are just moved out of position and then continue to enjoy their issues. Question of 1MDB has been raised recently, but I think even a more serious issue is the question that I've seen over the last few days about the potential inheritance by somebody among different siblings which do not seem to show equal distribution. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question, please. Over here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Boon Zedi from the Center of Public Policy Studies. And my question is towards Christopher and Stephen concerning the process of recruitment. And I certainly can appreciate comments made by Mr. Stephen earlier concerning the requirement for the MACC to have an independent recruitment and selection process for the purpose of matching the skills. The example given was asking a farmer to do an auditor's job. I certainly can appreciate that need. But my question would be, would there be a risk of favoritism or nepotism in that process? Because our Human Services Department is a procedure designed to ensure that there are no preferences in the system. So perhaps there's more details in the working paper, which I have not read. Is there a way where the proposal is more transparent in terms of selection process? Thank you.
The panel now, we've got lots of questions, mainly to do with I think the structure of the MACC. There's a little bit of confusion as to whether the ACSC is a preferred model or strengthening the MACC itself. I think there's also probably some different opinions amongst the panelists themselves. And then everything else apart from this particular commission. So things on the Whistleblowers Act, I think people have questions on. So maybe, I'm not sure, Chris or Stephen would like to answer?
Thanks, Tricia. Yeah, that's a lot of questions, a lot of comments, good comments. One, Joseph, you're right. We are talking about structural reforms to in place structural independence. That does not excuse personal independence and integrity. For example, if you have a courageous, forthright law enforcer now, that person will do what it takes to get the job done, irrespective of whether there are structural protections protecting that law enforcer from personal repercussions. So you are right. But for us, the personal courage is just as important as the structural independence, because we recognize human frailty. Not everybody has the personal courage to do what is necessary, even absence structural protection. So we do recognize that, and I think we can benefit overall in placing structural independence. So the proposal is for that. You will also realize from the discussions and comments made that when we propose reforms for the MACC to enhance their ability to combat corruption, we immediately realize that it is not just reformation of MACC. For the reformation of MACC to achieve the objective of effectively combating corruption, it really involves a wider range of reforms. So one, we spoke of, I think the gentleman behind, I didn't get your name.
Sorry, my name is Lal Chan.
Lal Chan, yeah. So yes, part of the proposal is to separate the office of the Attorney General from that of the Public Prosecutor, because there is inherent conflict in the two. Attorney General is a political appointee, chief legal advisor to the government. In fact, in all civil suits, the Attorney General's chambers represents all members of government, including cabinet ministers. So if you sue a member of a minister or you sue a public servant, the Attorney General acts as lawyer for that person. But wearing the hat of public prosecutor, they are in theory placed in a position to actually prosecute public servants, including ministers, if there is cause to do so. Inherent conflict, therefore it should be split. The other systemic and institutional reforms that would be relevant to MACC reform would be, as Tuku Zain said, parliamentary reform. It's long overdue. We have spoken about this in other situations with respect to other issues, where there should be now a system of parliamentary standing committees for various aspects of governance, one of which would be for MACC. That answers the question, I think, posed by Imtiaz, as to there shouldn't just be a cursory reporting by MACC to Parliament. Submits its report to Parliament, what is done with it? It's put in the shelf. And the reality is, if you really wish to go through with a fine-tooth comb a report by a body like MACC with respect to its work for a year, you need time. Parliament doesn't have that time to sit in session going through one report. They also have to go through Suhakam's report, for example. So you need parliamentary standing committees. That all of these reports feeds into dedicated committees that examine it, have public consultations, questioning, examination, calling for information, and so forth. So that's another reform. Then we talk about, in order to combat, encourage whistleblowers and to combat corruption, you need to have access to information. A lot of corruption, by definition, is a crime that is done behind closed doors, away from public glare. So you need whistleblowers, and whistleblowers need to substantiate their whistleblowing. they need to get their hands on real documents, for example. But these documents are all sulit, rahsia. Under the OSA, it's an offense for you. You discourage whistleblower. Where's the confidence level of members of the public to step forward? So you need an amendment to the OSA to take into account freedom of information. And we're not saying that members of the public do not now have a subsisting right to information. But we are saying that you need to come up with legislation to set out how that right is going to be exercised and the corresponding obligation of government to institutionalize mechanisms that facilitate access to such information. So for example, you have a right to information. Where do you go to today? Where do you go to ask for a specific piece of information from some department of government? You won't even know where to start. And even if you do know where to go to, is there an internal mechanism to be able to ascertain, gather all of the information and pass it on to you in a timely fashion? You know, if you're doing investigative work, for example, it is no point putting in an application form for information of declassified documents, waiting 3 months for it, then looking through it, finding out that you need more information, that more documents that are named in those documents, and then waiting another 3 months for more. Yeah. So that's what the FOI legislation is intended to do. So you see that an MECC reformation requires an overhaul of our approach system.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Does Stephen want to answer?
I just want to deal with the two things I think Mr. Fu, the gentleman there, raised. One is in terms of really accountability. I think he just mentioned that as well. If you look at the service commissions as they are presently structured under the Constitution, they are actually obliged to lodge reports with Parliament on an annual basis. I don't think that happens. I don't think that we really see that, and we don't really know what is in that. If you're already looking at accountability, it should just not be about stats. Stats is not good enough. It can't be just about cryptic explanations as to what happened and did not happen. Either we go down the parliamentary standing committee route, or we actually have it as a debate, all right, a specific important matter that is debated, which is something that is done in other jurisdictions. The anti-corruption commissions countries, the anti-corruption commissions in other countries actually lay the reports in parliament to be debated, so questions can be asked. So that's a measure of accountability that you can bring to this. Now, in terms of recruitment, now, if MACC was going to be practicing nepotism, or the Service Commission is going to be practicing that, then it's really going to shoot itself in the foot. Because the entire purpose or the request for them is to have people who will be able to, who they can bring in, who will make their job easier. Now, if you're going to bring the wrong people in, then this whole effort is by them is going to be a failure. So I don't think that is intended. I think they are looking at recruiting the right people, but you're right. The criteria must be set, you know, the levels of qualification, the requirements of particular skills, that must be there. Those are objective factors. You can't run away from those factors. Those factors can be put down. Otherwise, I think the request to have autonomy in terms of recruitment is commendable. For the kind of job that they're doing, they should have that liberty to do that.
Cynthia wants to say something short.
Yeah, very short, just to address the comments about whistleblower protection and freedom of information. These are the two main tools that we actually need to combat corruption, as Christopher Leong said. But we all know that being a whistleblower in Malaysia is a really dangerous job. Because instead of investigating the complaint, they will investigate the complainant. And I've been in that situation, so I know. So the short example that I just want to state here, just to make it real for everyone, is that when I was in Swaram and we lodged the judicial complaint in France on the submarine deal, The reason was the information was not going to be obtainable here. So we tried our luck to see whether the contract could be obtained on the French side, and we were lucky enough that they opened a judicial complaint, an investigation on our complaint, and the French police actually raided the shipbuilding office, and that's how they got the contract, and that's how we got all the information. So the OSA, according to Tengku Razali Hamzah himself, has said hides 1,000 sins of corruption. So this is really the heart of where we need to focus our attention in terms of developing the public momentum on the right to know. We do have a right to know. So something as sensitive as the submarine deal could be justified in different ways, but something else like the KIDEX concessionaire agreement or the Selangor water deal, for example, how is that a threat to national security? It's not. It's actually our right to know. As taxpayers, it's our money that's going into all these public infrastructure deals and so on. And we are actually kept away from a lot of these things. So we do need to actually take that courageous step forward to start blowing the whistle wherever we can. Of course, with information that we know can be verified or is more or less credible. But if we don't take that step, knowing that it comes with risks, then we're forever going to be stuck in this culture of secrecy, no accountability, no transparency.
Well, before we get to the next round, I also like to say that, in many of the forums that we participate in, somehow or other somebody will always mention, okay, what about the political will? So I know it's going to come up in the crowd. I'm just jumping the gun here, because this is actually quite a major push through. We're talking about a constitutional change, a constitutional amendment, which does require a 2/3 majority in Parliament. How possible do you think that would actually take place, given the current political scenario in Parliament? Do our politicians on either side of the fence have that kind of political will to push this through? And maybe, I don't know, just very quickly, someone from the panel could talk about what is the government actually seeing as to all these proposals? I mean, we obviously have an absent panelists here. We don't have someone representing the government, but what do we think would be the response, if any? Well, probably not Imtiaz, but do we have a clue? Sorry, putting you on the spot here.
It's anybody's guess. Obviously, if we go on the basis that our present government is for transparency, good governance, then they should go for these. I mean, they may not agree to every detail of the proposal, but as a concept and as a whole, they should go for it. Particularly bearing in mind, for example, the government made it a point to appoint Datuk Paula, Minister in charge of integrity. So I would say, on the face of it, I think that most of the proposals, in terms of principle, an idea, should be welcomed by the government. Also bear in mind that the MACC themselves are in favor of finding ways to enhance and strengthen their abilities. But I cannot speak for the government. I just wish to highlight a couple. There's one question that we missed answering. I think maybe it's from Tunku Zain about the Whistleblowers Act. When you talk about whistleblower, are you talking about crooks? And do they get protection? Do you encourage crooks to get protection? Well, put it this way, currently as it stands under Section 11 of the Whistleblowers Act, whistleblowers who are participants in the criminal offence in which they are whistleblowing on will not get immunity. And hence, if some of you may have read a press release I issued last week, I said, is it in the public interest to grant participants in criminal offence immunity from prosecution, or is it a better public policy to plea bargain, offer a plea bargain to a lesser offence in exchange for testimony? Yeah. So I will tell you that Section 11 actually of the Whistleblowers Act actually envisages that it is not in the public interest to grant a whistleblower who is in fact a participant in the corrupt act any immunity. But of course, it is within the discretion of the Attorney General to offer a plea bargain in exchange for state's evidence. The other thing is I want to tell you, when we talk about structural and administrative reforms that are required, simple things like the Freedom of Information laws, it just occurred to me, we actually have it in 2 states, in Selangor and in Penang, by the Pakatan government. What has become of it? The Pakatan government, is the Pakatan government in these 2 states serious about it? They have passed a law, but I do not think that it is effective in terms of providing you with the information that you wish. I asked this question actually to Tricia once. I said one indicator of how serious they may be in making the freedom of information right easily available and accessible is look at the budget, the state budget, in the year that they passed legislation. Did they allocate sufficient resources to make the freedom of information a reality? Or was it just a piece of paper that passed through the day one? Right? So, I'm saying that these things require a lot of commitment. Who is going to be approving each and every application for release of a document? Are they going to be sending from department to department to department to get clearance? No. There should be an automatic declassification of documents. You can even have different grades of sensitivity. So, grade A sensitive documents, automatic declassification after 50 years. Grade 2 level of sensitive documents after 30 years. Grade 3 after 10 years, whatever. There must be a built-in mechanism constantly declassified.
Okay, we're actually running out of time. I'm just going to give maybe 2 people burning questions a chance to get it off your chest. So, anyone? Any takers? Robert, I'm sorry, you asked already. Sheridan? And one more, anyone? Okay, only Sheridan. And someone at the back. Okay, great, 2.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sheridan. I'm from the Malaysian Insider. There was a statement actually from the chairman of the Select Committee on Corruption. This is Tan Sri Abu Zahar Wujang in April last year. He had said that the MACC was considering a proposal for this, the Anti-Corruption Services Commission, that they were actually drawing up a proposal for this. Is this the same one that we're talking about right now? Are they working with the Bar Council? And if it is the same one, does it mean that the government is committed towards towards having the sort of constitutional reforms and amendments that it would take for this to become a reality? Thanks.
Thank you, Sheridan. And then one final one at the back.
Okay, good evening to the panel. I would just like to ask a question. My name is Kimberly from UNMC. Taking off from what Tricia said, that the citizens play an important role in this, I'd just like to know, coming from a normal citizen herself, how can we provide a channel for the public's voice to be heard on this matter? How will people's voice be considered in the revise of this proposal? Because like we said, citizens do matter in this, and looking at it, that it is for the citizens. So how will the panel who are proposing this proposal, how are they going to take in the citizens' concerns on this matter?
Okay, Chris will answer the first question from Sheridan.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, you're right. In my opening address just now, I did say that about 8 months ago, MACC through Tan Sri Abu Qasim did approach the Malaysian Bar, and as well as the European IDS, with asking us for our feedback as to reforms. And the specific reform that was mentioned was a constitutional reform, looking at a constitutional commission for the MACC. And that's why we say that the MACC is desirous of changes to improving itself, which is very good. It was also recently announced, I believe, by Datuk Paul Lau, Minister of Prime Minister's Department, that the Cabinet has approved in principle, in December, the Cabinet has approved in principle proposed amendments to the Federal Constitution to make the MACC autonomous and independent of the civil service. Having said that, and we have had several rounds of engagement with MACC. I must also say that every time that we, IDEAS or us or C4 and so forth, request for a meeting with MACC to ask further questions or to engage about these proposed reforms, they have always made time to meet with us. But having said all of that, until today, we have not yet seen the text, the actual text of MACC's proposal for the Constitutional Commission. We have asked for it, and we have been told that in time they will make that available to us. So Sharon, the answer to you is yes, we have been working with MACC and through them, I suppose, with the government. Yes, in fact, we had a meeting with Tan Sri Ujang. We also had a meeting with Datuk Paul Lau, who have been engaging the bar and IDEAS and C4 and the group of 5 of us on this issue. I hope that answers your question.
Maybe just to add on to what Chris said, while it's true that we have had these meetings with various representatives from government, it's important to point out that because we haven't seen the text, we would like to give our version of the text to all of you, because there might be differences between these two texts when that version comes out to us, and we want to make sure that there are safeguards such as the ones we have proposed, like the civil society representation of 40%, the way in which the commission members are going to be appointed. I mean, these are things that would ensure this new constitutional commission is not just given all its powers, but with no safeguards. So yeah, I hope that answers the point. I think Cynthia should answer the second question about how public could get involved.
Before that, just to answer the question about FOI in Selangor and Penang, there is an enactment in both states. A new tool has been given to us, but we have not been sensitized enough on how to use it. So it's lying there as a dead instrument. The SALCAT, the Selangor Select Committee on Accountability and Transparency, had a recent public hearing to look at why it's been ineffective, what are the blocks and so on. So right now they've trained officers to sit in every agency in the Selangor government, and we ourselves had actually gone to test it during the last drought last year, the samples that were containing plumbum and zinc and all that. So we actually went to LUAS, the Selangor Water Agency, to ask them to make public the readings that were coming out. The officer was not present, but I filled up the form and submitted it. They chopped it and they said, okay, diterima and so on. And then nothing happened after that. So when I tweeted about nothing being done about it, then the media secretary of Tan Sri Khalid at that time quickly responded to say, oh, we are going to look into the matter, and so we will reply to you as soon as possible, which they did after about a week or so, and they said it's now available on the website. So which means the machinery is also not very well oiled. They aren't being tested, and we have to blame ourselves for it because we have that tool and we're not actually taking enough measures to go test it. So I do understand. If you want information,
then we'll ask you to tweet it first.
I also know an auntie from Section 17 who was so disgruntled over KIDEX. She went to lodge a report, an application to get the concessionaire made public. But she received a written response a couple of weeks later to say that because this involved federal jurisdiction, so it was not possible for Selangor to use the FOI. So, so that's another issue of federal laws over the freedom of information enactment and so on.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry.
No. So the question that I'm supposed to answer.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say that for those of you living in Selangor and Penang, you should actually exercise that right to try and obtain information. But just note that the information has to be a state jurisdiction information, not federal, not federal, not linked to the federal government agencies. But still, the point about how public can give in their input. Could you answer that?
Yeah. Okay. So, but anyway, I think it's really important that we test it, because only if we test it then we know whether it works or not. So now we've just been letting it lie. So that's one way in which we can actually get involved. We need to actually start building public participation around the freedom of information enactments. And we do need to keep testing this thing that involves federal, because I think this is where we need to start talking about how the Official Secrets Act actually provides a real obstacle to receiving information which is not a threat to national security, like public infrastructure projects, for example. KIDEX, concessionaire, Selangor water deal, so many infrastructure projects that are in Penang and Selangor that involve federal funds, the undersea tunnel and so on. So I think we do need, that's one very concrete way. Another is we have come up with a crowdsourcing site called combatcorruption.my. The next Auditor General's report that comes out, I don't think we should just leave it to the news portals like Malaysian Insider and Malaysia Kini to make a big frenzy out of the whole thing, but we should start crowdsourcing and writing our own insights. In fact, we had spoken to the Public Accounts Committee Chairman, Nur Jazlan. He's been very open to receiving a citizen audit report. And he's saying that it's high time citizens get involved and start engaging with PAC. And so our response back to him is, as long as the Public Accounts Committee is not open to the public via its hearings and so on, it will still shut the door on us. So it's our job now to keep telling them to open the door, put a wedge there that some air can go through, and we will slowly be able to push the door open. It's not going to open wide immediately, but it really takes a whole lot of effort and initiative from our part, because I think that whole courage thing that Chris talked about is something we need to build together. It's not going to be immediately made available by the powers that be.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe I'll ask Imtiaz to, do you have any additional thoughts? Because I realize that not many opportunities for you to answer.
I think on the,
final thoughts.
Yeah, on the political will issue, I think when the MACC bill was put through Parliament, it had support from both sides. The concern was really about certain mechanisms and so on, but in principle, both sides of the House supported the bill. So I think you have an indication there about how both sides, perhaps because they can't be seen not to be supporting any reforms where corruption is concerned, they have to say yes. And I think that's something that we need to exploit. So here we've got Dr. Paul saying that in principle, Cabinet has approved the idea of a constitutional amendment, although he says he talks about it in the context of a public service commission. Yes, a public service commission. So fine, but at least there's some recognition there that it needs to be done, and it involves a constitutional amendment. So I think that's something that needs to be exploited somehow by civil society. And I think rather than leave them to set the pace, I think there needs to be more events like this, or greater public outreach to show that, look, there are possibilities. And I was just talking to Chris about whether it's possible for the group to actually draft, once you're settled on what the concept is, to draft the proposed amendment to the Constitution and make it available to people and let them see that, look, it's actually not that bad an idea, and start forcing the political discussion around it. Now, to go back to something that Joseph said, I agree, but about the Election Commission and so on, right? But I think that the answer lies in the fact that the legislation that we're using for the Election Commission is pretty old. There's nothing to stop us from suggesting a new way of looking at that problem. So these discussions about public consultation mechanisms being embedded into the law as appointments, for purposes of appointments, these are new things. Accountability, how you do it, these are also new things. When we drafted the Social Inclusion Commission bill, the idea of the concept, we actually put into the legislation expectations about website publication, frequency of publication, what was meant to be reported. It's all there, pretty finely itemized. So there are ways around it that we can perhaps use. So I think what I'd like to say in closing is, obviously this is a critical issue for everyone. And I think both sides recognize that. I think there's an opportunity there for civil society groups to take the lead and start maybe, I mean, why not start a roadshow since, roadshow seems... we can do a roadshow, right? Let's start talking about this. Because I think the water privatization that happened, there the ministry started it because they were looking to privatize. And you remember for the water privatization, there was actually an amendment to the constitution because they had to move water from the state to the concurrent list. So there was an amendment. And that required them to actually go around talking about why it was all right, because they were concerned about it being seen as yet another attempt to enrich crony businesses and so on. They didn't want that, and they had a public consultation exercise. And all right, so into the WSIA, the Water Services Industry Act, we got some new things coming in, which is pretty interesting. Water is a basic right. The Water Consultation Council was there. I mean, okay, it's not the greatest mechanism, but it's there. I think we shouldn't say there's no point to having these sorts of events or outreach on a wider platform, because I think it's such an important issue.
Yeah, and it won't be the first time a lawyer is going on a roadshow, right? Okay, I think final words from the panelists. Imtiaz has already given his. I think, Cynthia, you have anything else to add? No? Stephen? Okay, maybe I'll give the last word to Chris because he's actually on his final week of being the president of the Malaysian Bar. So I think, you should say some last words for us here.
Okay, thanks, Tricia. For the purposes of tonight, I don't think I can add anything more that would be useful to the various issues that have been raised. All I wish to say is that this is going to be an ongoing piece of work. We do not tonight present to you something that has been thought completely through, resulting in what we would claim to be 100% proposal. So we take on board all of your feedback. Certainly the question of whether or not we have a Constitutional Service Commission with the MACC as it currently is subsisting underneath it, or whether we transform the subsisting MACC to a full-fledged Constitutional Commission in and of itself. That is a question that we have been grappling with, looking at the pros and cons. So that is an issue left standing. Another issue, and I hope you will take back and think about it, and do give us your feedback by email or whatever, is how are the commissioners themselves going to be elected? Because the commissioner then would be in charge of nominating and recommending the appointment of the Chief Commissioner and all of the other upper management of the MACC. So the people who sit on the appointments of the selection committee of the Commission themselves would be important. So that's something that we are also trying to think through. So I leave you with that thought, that we value your input. We do not at any time claim that we have thought things all the way 100% and come up with a perfect proposal. It is still a work in progress. Thank you very much.
One final note is that we are going to produce a set of infographics, so very colorful, kind of easy to understand leaflets that can be distributed online. You can send it around to your friends. So it interprets all the heavy text that you see on the screen in easy to understand little infographics that can be distributed. If you want to give any comments, I'm sure you can send emails to any of us. Just check us out on the Ideas website. And I guess for the bar, you can see some of the bar officers who are standing around here as well. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And please, once again, put your hands together for our